Every Sunday, my husband left the house. For 15 years, I never asked where he was going, but one February morning, he forgot his phone and a woman called. I answered. Her voice was warm and unhurried, the voice of someone who had been calling that number for a very long time. "Are you on your way yet?" she said. I didn't speak. She asked again, "Daniel, are you coming?" I put the phone down. Then I picked it back up, found the number, and wrote the address on the back of a grocery receipt with a pen that was almost out of ink. Then I sat down on my kitchen floor in my robe and stared at the wall. I didn't cry because some part of me had already known, and knowing, finally, felt less like a wound and more like a diagnosis. My name is Ellen. I was 44 years old, living in a colonial-style house in a quiet district on the edge of Hanoi with a man I had married at 29. His name was Daniel. He sold commercial real estate, coached our son's little league team, and made the best Sunday morning pancakes you've ever tasted. We had a dog named Biscuit, a daughter in college, a son in high school, and a mortgage with 4 years left on it. From the outside, we looked like reassurance. From the inside, that's the story. For the first decade of our marriage, Sundays were ours. Coffee in bed, newspapers across the duvet, the kids dragging in with cartoon-glazed eyes. Daniel would make breakfast. I would call my mother. We took Biscuit to the park. It was ordinary and warm and exactly what I had wanted. Then, about 15 years in, things shifted gradually. The way seasons change, you don't feel the exact moment summer becomes fall, but one morning you reach for a jacket and understand that something is gone. He started leaving Sunday mornings. Once a month at first, a client, a college friend, errands that couldn't wait. Once a month became twice. Twice became every single Sunday without fail. Gone by 9,030, back by 2,000. Always bringing something home, coffee, a newspaper. Once a small succulent in a terracotta pot that he placed on the kitchen windowsill and never mentioned again. I noticed the other things too. The way he angled his phone when a text arrived, the way his work stories grew vague. The way he began complimenting my appearance with a studied consistency that felt less like love and more like management. I asked my friend Carol once if I was being paranoid. She said, "Paranoid women aren't usually wrong, they're just early." I laughed. I poured more wine. I went home and watched Daniel sleep and told myself 15 years, shared bills, shared children, shared roof. I owed him the benefit of the doubt. So I stayed quiet. For 3 more years, I stayed quiet. And then came that Sunday in February. Flat gray sky, the kind that looks like old dishwater. Daniel kissed my cheek, took his keys, and left. I stood at the kitchen counter holding my coffee. That's when I heard it. A buzz from the counter near the fruit bowl. His phone, he had left it behind. I wasn't going to touch it. I had never gone through my husband's phone in 15 years of marriage. Then it buzzed again and the screen lit up. One letter, just R. My hand moved without permission from my brain. I answered, and that's when she asked if he was on his way. I put the phone face down, stood completely still. Then I opened recent calls, found the contact, and wrote the address from her information on that grocery receipt with the dying pen. I folded it and tucked it in my coat pocket. When Daniel came back for his phone minutes later, I was at the sink rinsing a mug. "Forgot my phone," he said. "It's on the counter," I said. He picked it up, glanced at the screen, checking, I understood now, for any sign of disturbance. There was none. I had placed it back exactly as I found it. He gave me a small smile, left again. I waited until his car turned the corner. Then I sat back down on the floor. What followed, while Dano moved through our house with his usual cheerful carefulness, was a private and ruthless accounting. The house, purchased in 2011, now worth close to $500,000. The retirement accounts, joint, carefully built. My own savings, a modest account I had opened 6 years ago for what I told Daniel were household management purposes. He had never asked to see the statements. That small account suddenly felt like the most important thing I had ever done. I did not confront Daniel. That was my first decision, and I made it deliberately. I had watched enough friends go through divorces to understand one thing. The spouse who confronts first without evidence loses. They cry. They accept whatever explanation is offered, and the other party has time to cover tracks, move assets, prepare. I was not going to do that. I called Carol from a grocery store parking lot and told her everything in a flat, factual voice that surprised even me. She said, "Don't touch the joint accounts. Don't move a dollar." Then she gave me the name of a divorce attorney, Patricia Hollis, downtown, specializing in high-asset cases. I called that afternoon. Patricia was a compact woman in her late 50s with reading glasses pushed into silver hair and the calm efficiency of someone who had sat across from devastated people for 30 years. On the wall behind her desk, a framed quote read, "The truth will set you free, but first it will make you miserable." I appreciated the honesty. She explained what Vietnamese law considered. She answered my questions precisely. Then she gave me the name of a private investigator, Gary Sutter, former police detective, deeply unimpressed by everything, which I found reassuring. I met him at a diner near Hohen-Keekum Lake and gave him the address on Fieldstone Drive in Daniel's Sunday schedule. He quoted me 2 weeks of documented surveillance. I wrote him a check from my personal account. That same week, I drove past the address for the first time. A quiet residential street on the city's outskirts. Tan brick, 2-story, silver SUV in the driveway, window boxes that would hold flowers in warmer months. It looked almost exactly like our house. That detail stayed with me for days. 2 weeks later, an envelope arrived at my office address. I had asked Gary to send nothing to the house. I opened it in my car. 14 photographs, clear, professional, time-stamped. The first showed Daniel's car in the Fieldstone Drive driveway at 9047 on a Sunday morning. The second showed Daniel at the front door, not knocking, using a key. He had a key. The subsequent photograph showed him leaving at 1023. And in one photograph taken through a window, technically legal, Gary confirmed, a woman stood at a kitchen counter in a bathrobe, laughing at something Daniel had said. She looked to be in her late 30s, dark hair, comfortable, at home because she was at home. This was her house, and my husband had the key to it. The last photograph removed any remaining possibility of misinterpretation. Daniel and the woman in her driveway just before he left, her hand on his arm, his hand on her face. The gesture of people who have been this for a very long time and see no reason to hide it in their own driveway. I'd put the photographs back in the envelope, sat in my car in the gray February afternoon, and understood with absolute documentable certainty that my marriage had been a lie for at least as long as my daughter had been alive. I put the car in drive. I had a plan to execute. Patricia filed the divorce petition on a Tuesday in early March. I had spent 2 weeks preparing copies of 15 years of joint tax returns, 2 independent appraisals on the house, a full financial timeline of our marriage showing that while Daniel's income had been larger, my contribute. The petition cited irreconcilable differences. The photographs stayed in the file, available but not yet deployed. Daniel was served at his office on a Wednesday at 2014 in the afternoon. Patricia texted me one word: served. I was at my desk. I set my phone face down and finished the spreadsheet I was working on. Then I went to the break room, poured a coffee, stood at the window, and felt something I hadn't expected. A deep physical calm, not happiness, not quite relief, something more like the feeling of having told the truth after a very long silence. He called 7 times between 2000, 1003, and 4000. I didn't answer. That evening, his car was in the driveway when I got home. He was in the kitchen looking like a man who'd been hit by something he hadn't seen coming. 15 years, he said. You're not even going to talk to me first? I'm talking to you now, I said. I put my purse down. I did not raise my voice. Were you going to talk to me first? Before you used a key to someone else's house? How long, Daniel? He changed fast. The wounded husband evaporated and something cooler replaced it. You've been investigating me, he said quietly. I've been protecting myself, I said. 3 days later, she called. I didn't know her full name yet, though Gary's report had identified her through public records. Her name was Rebecca, 38, divorced once, no children, marketing director. She called while I was in the cereal aisle at the grocery store. She said there were things I didn't understand about my situation. She said she and Daniel had been together for 11 years and that if I pushed this, I should know they had resources and had spoken to an attorney and I wasn't going to get what I thought. I put a box of oatmeal in my cart. Thank you for the call, Rebecca, I said. Please don't contact me again. Any further communication should go through my attorney. I hung up. 11 years. Tyler was 5 when it started. Hannah was 10. I got to my car and sat with it fully. The rage, the grief, the sheer scale of it. For exactly 4 minutes, I set a timer. Then I called Carol. She called me, I said. Of course she did, said Carol. Are you okay? No, I said honestly, but I'm not stopping. Daniel asked to meet for coffee a week later at a cafe we'd gone to occasionally over the years. He arrived looking composed, placed his hands on the table in a deliberate gesture of openness, and said he didn't want a war. Neither did I told him. Then he made his offer. A buyout of my share in the house based on the original purchase price, not the appreciated value. And even split on the retirement accounts that ignored the fact that his was 3 times the size of mine, no spousal support. I'll pass this to my attorney, I said. He leaned forward. Patricia Hollis is going to cost you more than you'll gain. We know each other. We don't need... Daniel, I said, and something in my voice stopped him. You had a key to her house. You spent 11 years of our marriage with another woman, 12 minutes from where our children were growing up. You left every Sunday and came home and made pancakes. I paused. My attorney will be in touch. I left first. I did not look back. In the parking lot, I sat in my car and noticed that my hands were completely steady. That week, I told Hannah. I drove to her university in Da Nang, took her to lunch, told her as plainly and kindly as I could. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, so basically my whole life. I'm so sorry, I said. Mom, she looked up. Don't be sorry, you didn't do anything. I held that sentence close for a long time afterward, the way you hold something warm. Tyler took it differently, the specific teenage combination of fury and shutdown. He didn't speak to Daniel for 3 weeks, but my children were not broken. Shaken, yes. Reoriented, yes. But not broken, and that told me something important about the 15 years. Even inside the lie, I had built something real. My children were evidence of it. Then they came on a Sunday. Of course, it was a Sunday. I was back from a morning walk with Biscuit when I heard a car in the driveway. Daniel's car, and behind it, a silver SUV. The silver SUV from Fieldstone Drive. I made sure Tyler was at a friend's house. He was. Then I opened the front door before they could knock, because I wasn't going to give them the moment of superiority that comes with being the one who rings the bell. They stood side by side on my porch. Daniel looked uncomfortable. Rebecca looked precisely the opposite, composed, pleasantly dressed, holding a paper bag from a bakery, warm croissants. I could smell them. The deliberateness of that detail, the croissants, the Sunday morning, the driveway of my house, was either unconscious or the most audacious thing I had ever witnessed. We thought maybe this had gotten too adversarial, she said. Her voice was warm and measured, professional, a marketing director, of course. I understand you're hurt, she continued. And you have every right to be, but Daniel and I have been building something real. The marriage, toward the end, you must have felt it too, the distance. The stop, I said. She stopped. I looked at her for a long moment. She was doing what people do when they want something from you, making herself likable, the soft voice, the posture, the croissants. She had told herself that if she was warm enough, reasonable enough, I would fold, that I was the kind of woman who folded. She had miscalculated. I'm going to tell you what I see, I said. You came to my house on a Sunday, unannounced, with baked goods, to explain to me that my marriage wasn't real and yours is. You want me to accept a reduced settlement, stop the proceedings, and wish you both well. Rebecca's pleasant expression held for 2 more seconds, then something underneath it shifted. What I want, she said, crisply now, is for you to be realistic. You're fighting a process that will cost you 18 months and $40,000 in legal fees. You're still going to end up in a smaller house with a dog and a teenager and a salary that doesn't cover the life you're used to. We're offering you a clean exit. You're offering me less than I'm entitled to, I said. I'm entitled to 15 years. 15 years of tax returns, retirement contributions, property appreciation, and documented adultery that your attorneys will have a very difficult time explaining to a judge. I'm entitled to spousal maintenance, which my attorney will be requesting, and I'm entitled to you leaving my property right now. Daniel made one final attempt. He stepped forward and lowered his voice into the register he always used when he wanted to sound like the only reasonable adult in the room. Think about Tyler. Think about what a prolonged case does to a 16-year-old boy. We can still do this quietly. Don't, I said, flat and final. Don't use our son as a bargaining chip on my front porch. He is not a strategy, and you do not get to invoke his name to protect yourself from consequences you chose. That landed. I watched it land. Daniel's jaw tightened. He looked away, silent. Rebecca looked at me for a long moment, recalibrating. Then she said, "You're making a mistake." "That's my right," I said. They left. I watched both cars turn the corner and disappear. Then I closed my door, leaned against it briefly, and let myself feel the current of fear that had been running beneath the whole conversation. Because she wasn't entirely wrong. The process was expensive and slow and brutal, but she was wrong about the outcome. I had Patricia Hollis. I had 14 time-stamped photographs. I had 15 years of financial documentation. And I had the specific steely quality of a woman who has been quiet for 15 years and finally decided to speak. I texted Patricia. They came to the house. I handled it. Let's accelerate the timeline. Her response came in 4 minutes. Good. I have something to show you. Call me Monday. What Patricia showed me on Monday changed the shape of everything. Gary Sutter, extended into Daniel's professional finances, had identified a pattern of payments flowing from Daniel's real estate commissions through a small LLC registered in Delaware, an entity that appeared on none of our joint tax returns. Over 11 years, approximately $340,000 had moved through it. Property costs, restaurant charges, travel, and one jewelry purchase for $4,200 made on February 14, 2019. Valentine's Day. The year I received grocery store flowers and cooked a dinner I thought was romantic. He was keeping a separate financial life, Patricia said. It changes your maintenance claim. It changes your asset claim. It changes everything. The hearing was 6 weeks later. Daniel arrived with a Chicago firm, expensive, polished, matching leather portfolios. I sat beside Patricia in a dark blazer, hands folded, the same stillness I had been practicing for months. His attorney led with mutual emotional withdrawal, the implication that both parties had contributed to the breakdown. Patricia presented the photographs first, methodically time-stamped, narrated in a flat, factual voice. She did not editorialize. She didn't need to. Then she presented the financial records. It was during this portion that Daniel, for the first time in the years I had known him, lost his composure in a room where other people could see it. His attorney leaned over urgently. The whispered exchange grew less quiet, then less quiet again. The judge glanced at them once with the neutrality of someone who has seen this particular moment many times. The forensic accountant dismantled Daniel's attorney's LLC defense in about 12 minutes. Line by line, payment by payment, including, notably, the Valentine's Day jewelry. Patricia asked the accountant to confirm what date that purchase was made. February 14, 2019, she said. A small sound from Daniel's side of the table. Just a sound. The exhale of a man watching something collapse that he spent a decade carefully constructing. In the hallway after the session, Daniel caught me by the elbow. His voice was stripped of the careful management it usually carried. Whatever you think of me, the kids don't need to go through more than. I've thought about the kids every day for 6 months, I said. I removed my arm from his hand, gently but completely. That's why I made sure everything was documented, so there's no ambiguity. So Tyler and Hannah don't spend the next 3 years watching us negotiate in the dark. He looked at me and I saw something I hadn't expected. Not anger, not cold calculation, recognition. The recognition of a person who has fully understood that the woman standing in front of him is not who he thought she was. Wait, good, I thought. That was exactly who I needed to be. The judge issued findings 3 weeks later. The court found that the LLC had functioned as a sustained vehicle for concealing marital income over an 11-year period. The total amount identified, including contributions to the Fieldstone Drive property, personal expenditures, travel, dining, and the Valentine's Day jewelry, came to $387,000. The judge used the phrase sustained financial deception in the written findings. What I received, full ownership of the house with Daniel, required to release his equity through structured payments from verified personal income. Overseen by a court-appointed financial officer, he could not move money without documentation. My full share of the joint retirement accounts, plus a proportional adjustment for the years his contributions had been suppressed by the LLC diversions. Spousal maintenance for 6 years, calculated not from his reduced declared income, but from his documented earning capacity. And a provision for Tyler's remaining school costs in college, with no room for future renegotiation. I signed the final settlement on a Thursday morning in April. Spring light came through Patricia's window and made a warm stripe across the conference table. I read all 31 pages before I signed. It took 40 minutes. Patricia refilled both our coffees twice. When I finished, she said, "You did well." "We did well," I said. Then she slid one more page across the desk. A letter from Rebecca's attorney addressed to Patricia's firm. Rebecca had learned of the financial findings and retained her own counsel. She was pursuing a civil claim against Daniel, fraudulent misrepresentation. She had, she argued through counsel, made major life decisions over 11 years based on explicit assurances that Daniel intended to leave the marriage and build a future with her. With the LLC findings in the public record, her attorney had substantial documentation to work with. I read the letter twice. There is a very specific feeling that comes from learning that a man who deceived his wife for 11 years had simultaneously been deceiving his mistress about his intentions. It is not triumph, it is not pity, it is something more exhausted than either. A recognition that deception is rarely a targeted surgical behavior. It is a way of being. A man who can look his wife in the face every Sunday for 15 years and perform the role of husband is not a man capable of being entirely honest with anyone. She trusted him too, I said quietly. It appears so, said Patricia. That doesn't make what she did acceptable, I said. No, said Patricia, but it does make it explicable. And I meant that not as forgiveness, just as a fact about the world. The deceiver is responsible for both destructions simultaneously. I walked out into the thin April sunlight and called my mother. It's done, I said. She was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. Come for dinner, bring Tyler. I drove to Tyler's school and signed him out for the afternoon. He got in the car and looked at my face with the directness that teenagers develop after they've been through something real. "Oh, is it over?" "It's over," I said. He nodded once, put his earbuds in, then he pulled one out, not looking at me, and said, "Mom, you okay?" I thought about the kitchen floor in February, the almost dead pen, the grocery receipt, the terracotta paint already waiting in the garage. "Yes," I said, and I meant every word of it. The first thing I did with my own house was repaint the kitchen. The cautious grayish Daniel had chosen because it photographed well was replaced with deep, warm terracotta. Hannah stood in front of it when she came home for spring break and said, "That's you, Mom." I kept Biscuit. I kept the rooster clock. I'm still not sure why. I kept the succulent that had somehow survived through everything and moved it to the terracotta kitchen where it looked, against all odds, like it had always belonged there. The first year was hard. Tyler's anger had phases. I found him a therapist, and within a few months, Tyler described him as actually not useless, which I took as high praise. Hannah and I built the adult friendship that mothers and daughters can only have once something has stripped away the pretense that the mother has everything under control. I was offered a team lead position at work and took it. I went back to watercolors. I had painted in my 20s and set it down when life filled up with other people's needs. I painted badly, then less badly, then occasionally well. I hung one on the terracotta kitchen wall. On Sunday mornings, those specific Sunday mornings that had once been the site of a recurring, unexamined absence, I made my own coffee and sat in my terracotta kitchen with the newspaper and Biscuit at my feet. The absence of Daniel felt increasingly like space rather than loss. I was not lonely in the way I had feared. I was sometimes alone, which is different. As for Daniel, I learned what I learned secondhand and without seeking it out. Rebecca's legal action had complicated his life significantly. His business contracted. 2 significant clients left. He was living in a 1-bedroom apartment in a suburb I didn't know well. He and Rebecca were no longer together. She had sold the house on Fieldstone Drive. Whatever future she had waited 11 years for had not materialized. Deception doesn't discriminate. It damages everyone in its radius, including, in the end, the person doing the deceiving. What I thought about on those Sunday mornings was the woman I was now, quieter than before, more certain of herself, less interested in being managed, and more interested in being known. She had a lawyer she trusted, a therapist she valued, a best friend who had talked her through a parking lot in February, a sister who called every Sunday, and children who were, against the odds of the year, okay. She had a small watercolor on a terracotta wall. She was, I thought, carefully without jinxing it, happy. If this story taught me anything, it's this. Silence is not loyalty, it is just silence. And knowing, even when it hurts, even when it costs everything, is always better than not knowing. Thank you for listening until the end.